PodSaaS, where we're putting the SaaS back in sassy. Sponsored by LeadrPro, where you can book demos with target customers on demand and fill your sales pipeline instantly.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of PodSaaS. I'm your host, Chris Shang, and today we have Vince from Axway. How are you doing, Vince?
Good, Chris. Great to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for joining us. Where are you joining us from?
Austin, Texas, in the home office.
Got it. Is Axway now like a fully distributed team, or is it? Are you guys based out of Austin as well?
No, I'm the only one in Austin, Texas. We have a couple scattered throughout Texas, but our home offices are in Phoenix, Arizona, and Paris, France.
Oh, got it. Very cool. Cool. Well, before we jump into what we call like a series, just like rapid fire questions where we get to know you as an individual a little bit better, you mind sharing with us what Axway does and who makes a great customer for you guys?
Sure. So Axway is a business-to-business integration provider of software. It's been around for about 20 years, was born in Paris, France, and now home is dual home between Paris and Phoenix, Arizona. And we help enterprises exchange data, exchange information with other enterprises. So, if you're a retail company and you need to share data about invoices or purchase orders or status of your inventory, we help them do that. If you're in financial services and you're sending payments, domestically or internationally, if you are doing ACH payments to employees, et cetera, we also help them do that. And in healthcare, if you are part of, let's say, a medical procedure approval process, or certainly insurance claims, et cetera, we help enterprises do that kind of stuff, not just within the four walls of their enterprise, but with the broad ecosystem of partners that they work with.
Got it. And so is it pretty like a custom curated solution based on a use case basis, as opposed to like a full? Yeah, so as opposed to like a fully like SaaS product?
So it can be, it's custom in the sense that every business and their processes are going to be slightly different, right? Mm-hmm. So the way in which business A does a credit approval is going to be slightly different than the way business B ultimately does it. That said, there are certainly always going to be some sort of regulatory and or compliance constraints around it. And more in the industry, there is an ongoing normalization around, let's call it the protocols or the communication medium that's being used, but for two businesses to actually interact. It was, let's say, 10 or even 20 years ago, much more around what we call file-based integration or message-based integration, of which there are standards for what an invoice looks like or what a purchase order looks like. Today, it's evolving more and more to be APIs. Different types. It could be REST SOAP, it could be REST, maybe it's more event-based, but they are normalizing more and more so that there is less, let's say, customization or bespoke and one-off approaches to the way in which these businesses will be integrating with each other.
Got it. Okay, that helps a lot. Cool. I would love to talk a little bit more about what your day-to-day looks like, at Axway now, and the size of the team that you manage, and how the evolution of your role has progressed as your career path has progressed, right? So before we get there, though, would love to talk about just more about you as a person in this rapid-fire questions. If you're up for it, we can get things started. If you have any questions, let me know.
Sure, let's do it.
All right, perfect. First question, super easy. Favorite entrepreneur and or startup story that you have?
Favorite entrepreneur would be Jeff Bezos. Okay. Do you want me to answer the startup one, or was it an either or?
It's an either or, yeah. So what particular facet of Jeff Bezos' story do you particularly gravitate towards?
The one I tell the most is the concept of the everything store flywheel that he had back in the early 90s around the founding of Amazon. With sort of growth being at the center, but going from delighting customers or having great service. If we do that well, then that will bring in more people, because they'll likely be telling their friends that I had great service with Amazon. And if we bring more people, then that's going to incent more sellers to sell on his platform. So you're going to bring more sellers, and then more sellers creates more selection of products. So how they go from just simply selling books to other goods on their platform. And that the ability to be an everything store, obviously having more and more selection than anybody else, delights customers and creates more satisfaction, and likely will push down prices and create better quality reviews, et cetera, which then brings more people, which then brings more sellers, which then brings more selection, which improves customer satisfaction. Round and round the flywheel goes. And then how that's extended over time to include, how do we lower prices? Well, let's invest and create something called AWS. How do we create more delight with our customers? Well, we need to have better delivery services and provide them ourselves, because maybe we're not getting what we need from UPS or FedEx or others. And so now you have what would be, at least projected to be by the end of this year, the largest travel or logistics and operations company, versus the combined UPS, FedEx, and US Postal Service. So it's the whole, marriage of both sort of tech and business and customer delight and how the cycle feeds on itself is, at least today in the modern day, I think the most impressive story that he has been able to craft as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. Next question is, what did you want to be as a kid? And talking about like 9, 10, 11 years old, I saw that you have kind of like out the gate, basically been a fairly technical person. So curious as to like if that originated, very early on, or is that something that progressed later on?
I wanted to be a basketball player.
Okay. All right.
So that's where it started. My mom wanted me to be an accountant because she thought that would be good, steady work. But how I sort of moved into the world that I sit in today it's a pretty classic story, right? I think it was maybe I was 12, 13, 14. I had access to Apple II computers, Commodore 64 computers, began playing, with BASIC, creating some very sort of simple games around it. And that really kind of set me down the path of having a BBS, so bulletin board system. I'm not sure how many listeners would know what BBSs are these days, but think of it as certainly way pre-internet, but where a small cohort of folks get together, via computers connected via phone lines, and either play games or communicate with each other, share messages, et cetera. So that's really where it began. But honestly, if I were taller and probably more athletic, I would have really pushed hard on being a professional basketball player.
Awesome. What position did you play?
Point guard.
Okay. And did you play like throughout like high school, and did you like continue to play now?
Yeah, so I played through certainly elementary, middle school, played in high school, and do I play now? Funny story. I think the last time I really tried in basketball, I was at my kid's elementary school for some after school event, and we were in the gym, and I think they had a rim that was dropped down to about 9 feet. And I thought for sure I would be able to dunk on a 9-foot rim. And I went and tried to do so, and immediately felt my knee give out. Fortunately, I didn't hurt myself, but I realized at that point, any concept of me playing basketball is completely done at that point. So no, I don't play anymore.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I think I had a similar experience not too long ago, and that was like, okay, I'm good. Cool. Next question here is centered around the most painful experience, and this could be like a personal or professional event. I'll give you some context as to the question, but the idea I feel like of growth and personal professional growth, the exponential growth that we tend to see in the different phases or chapters of our life tends to come from being in extreme places of discomfort, or stem from there. So I'm just curious if there's been any situation, again, personally or professionally, that you allude back to. Obviously that during that time was like super trying and difficult to get through, but in hindsight, help build character or shape shift you in some way.
Sure. So I guess I would say the worst or most challenging or most difficult, or something I look back on and hated at the time, but realized it kind of helped forge me, at least, or send me down a path that I think has been very productive in my career was my second startup. And that second startup, it had 2 VC rounds. We were a company that was focused on essentially internet infrastructure to essentially speed up transactions on the internet, whether that was, let's say, search lookups or commerce transactions, et cetera. So this was early 2000s, thereabouts. And the really short story was, we had financing. We had grown to about 50 people. but we were really never able to find product market fit or customers that were willing to pay us money at scale. And we kind of came to this place where we were running out of money. We were not broke yet, but we were running out of money. And we had this decision to kind of figure out where we were going to go next. And we felt the idea still had significant merit, but the timing wasn't just yet correct, or we really hadn't found the thing that was going to be the basis for economic viability moving forward. And so in the end, we had to let myself and about 45 others of the 50 go in late 2003. It was December 19th, 2003. And really the whole experience that led up to it, our struggle to find the customers, our struggle to prove our worth, our struggle to just find fit, and then ultimately it culminating in having to let myself and a bunch of others go right before the holidays in 2003. It's still, a memory I relive frequently to this day, but also it set me off to go off to business school and to be, still technical, but really working more and more from the customer backwards as to what are the problems, what are the challenges, where can we carve out something unique and valuable as to what we're building and what we're creating, versus the other way around, which is I was more sort of builder led, right? Which is I can build these things, I can do things, 2x better than the way somebody's currently doing it, et cetera, which there's nothing wrong with that. But what I have found now in my career since that time is working backwards from the customer and their problems to be more fruitful than what I was experiencing back then.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Next question here is what motivates you in the 25th hour, right? So like whether it was in the, early part of that startup period until you kind of like got your legs as, maybe like climbing more of like this career path that you're onto now. But either way, I feel like we always run into situations professionally, where we feel like our backs are against the wall and we need to dig deep to find something to push ourselves forward. And it's not going to be paycheck driven. It's not going to be like a manager driven kind of, decision or motivator. So is there anything that you personally go to in the back of your mind that helps you propel forward?
I know it's, we talk about, not fearing failure or, fail fast, fail early, all those things, which, I agree with. But in the end, I definitely fear failing, right? I feel, there are others that, rely on me. There are others that, need me to be clear and making good decisions as best I can. And, when you're in that final hours and it looks like it's going to crash, the thing that, and you have nothing left to give, or you feel like you have nothing left to give. And for me, it's just, I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to give this thing the best chance of success that it possibly can. So that it doesn't go down as, a failure, that it doesn't go down as, and not a failure in the sense that you don't learn something from it, but like the venture that it was, the economic outcome that people put money into, or that people went along with you on a ride for, turned out to not work out is, I don't want that, or I don't want to, I want to live that as few times as humanly possible.
Makes sense. What do you do so again, this kind of coincides with that experience, but what do you do to decompress from those types of moments?
Hang with family and friends. I think connection, at least for me, connection, with friends, with coworkers, with your family, is what helps keep me grounded, which can be a walk. It can be a phone call. It can be, text exchanges. It can be whatever the communication is. I typically find that, even specifically, right, if something particularly bad is going on, or something particularly challenging, I'll call and talk to my dad. And we can talk about anything. We can talk about how his garden is doing, or what his lawn looks like, or the price of gasoline, whatever it is, right? It's just that connection back to, okay, there is a bigger picture, right? There are other things going on than the sort of, very myopic world that, you may be focused on and whatnot. And that tends to help give me perspective. It helps tend to, certainly get my mind off of things, and just sort of reconnect me to, there are more days left in this life than the one that I'm currently stuck in. And, just keep pushing, just keep moving, and, things will work out.
Awesome. So on your career path, I'm sure that you've also like picked up a lot of hats, learned a lot of new skill sets along the way that you probably didn't anticipate, 10 years ago, 15 years ago at the start of your career, whenever that might have been, right? What has been one of those skill sets that you've picked up that you have a strong emotional disposition towards? It could be either love or hate, but you just never thought, that would be something that you picked up, but you have a strong feeling towards it.
I'm a huge believer in routine. And I don't know, being consistent. And I have tools that I use. I have times that I wake up and sort of rituals that I go through. I mean, practically for listeners, there's this thing called the time box method. I can't remember what university, I don't know if that was Princeton or Yale or some school came up with it a long time ago. And I've been using time boxing for years now. And it's just a way for time boxing is about sort of setting what are your priorities for the day, like what are your big three things that you're focused on, sort of dumping everything that's in your head. So the list of sort of small things that are just flying around. And then trying to kind of structure your day on tasks that you're going to do, whether they're professional and or personal, but trying to structure your day as you go. And so like that routine of that's the first thing I do when I come to my desk in the morning. I don't look at mail. I don't look at text messages. I don't look at the news. I just simply sit down and kind of go through the exercise of, okay, what are the three things I really need to address today? What's all the junk that's flying around in my head? And now how do I want to sort of structure, with meetings, with personal stuff, with, doing real work? How do I want to structure today and go about it? And that I've tried it before, doing it before I go to bed. Some people believe that if you do these things before you go to bed, it'll kind of free your mind and allow you to rest better. That doesn't really work for me. I tend to do it first thing in the morning as the first step, sitting at my desk before I do anything else.
It's a good one. Cool. Last question. I have questions about that, but we'll get into it later. Last question here, just for rapid, the sake of being rapid and quick, is the idea of legacy. So what kind of impact do you want to leave on this world before you leave it?
I hope that it's somehow I left things a little bit better than when I got here. Right. Mm-hmm. I have three, relatively young kids. And I hope for them, whenever I exit and take the dirt nap, that I've had some degree of impact in making this place better for them, better for their friends. I just hope it's a little bit better.
All right. On that note, we're done with the rapid fire questions. But we'd love to talk a little bit more about your journey to where you are now. There's definitely a lot of nuggets in there that I wanted to explore. I think, first and foremost, to be, you had mentioned you had been a part of a few early stage, early startups in the earlier part of your career before you went to business school. You want to talk about what that looked like for you, coming out of college, growing up, having learned some of these technical skill sets. Was the goal at that time when you were younger to join a startup, to start a startup? What was the idea there? And then just talk about like some of those early days at those earlier companies.
Gosh, I wish I could tell you that I had a plan. The reality is, there wasn't a plan. Like I said, my mom wanted me to be an accountant because she thought that was good, honest, hard work. When I was in undergrad school and trying to figure out what my major is, I didn't go to undergrad knowing that I would, focus on computer science.
Oh, got it.
And I only really uncovered it because I sat down and was looking at the course catalog and was kind of going through all the different courses and all the different majors, and having some experience, with computers, with programming, et cetera. I came across all the different undergrad classes on computer science, and I can vividly remember the conversation with my mom and said, this is what I'm going to go study. And she couldn't understand it. She says, why? And I still remember to this day saying, well, I think I'm pretty good at this stuff. I don't know what it will mean for me as a job, but I think I can be pretty good at this kind of stuff. And that's what I went and majored in, which is odd because I don't know that I had the most fun doing it. I just simply knew that I would probably be pretty good at it. which is maybe at odds with what, folks, tend to tell people is, focus on your passion, focus on what you love. I obviously love basketball at the time, but kind of realized that there was a ceiling for how far I could go with that. But when I, saw what you would do in computer science, the classes that you would take and the concepts and ideas that you would learn, my view was I'm probably pretty good at doing this. I don't know what that means as a career. I mean, I knew there was software development and I knew I had older friends, who were software engineers and developers, but I really did not know if that was something that I would do professionally. I just knew that I'm going to study this. I'm good at this. And, we'll see where it takes us afterwards.
And so, after graduating in computer science and having that degree, how did you evaluate like the landscape for your first, few jobs? Like, was it something where, like I think a lot of times you're like making a decision where it's like, hey, you kind of get that path. Like I majored in finance and, you choose like, do you want to do investment banking and do you want to do it like at these top tier firms, or do you want to, do finance in another capacity where you're like maybe more corporate finance and working for a company in their financial departments? So was there any kind of like divide there in terms of how you were evaluating things?
Well, so this is where, my parents, I guess I would say, it's a piece of advice that still sticks with me today. And as part of my decision criteria, as I look at, any company that I would join or when I assess, the current state that I'm in, when I was coming out of school, because I finished school and essentially moved home for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months while I was looking for what to do next. And for whatever reason, I knew I did not want to go to the Silicon Valley. I didn't want to go up to the Bay Area and work up there. And so, being a Central California kid, then the answer was, okay, well, let's look south to Los Angeles or to San Diego. And, the advice that my parents gave me back then was, look for a place where you think you can learn, the role that you may be going into, whatever that role may be, that there are people that you think are, let's say honest and trustworthy, and where you think you can have a run that would take you a while and build you enough skills to go do something else. Right. By that point, I sort of knew it would be in software development of some degree. I knew that it would be probably in networking. So my undergrad focus was really on sort of the core internet, topics like TCP/IP and essentially networking protocols, networking standards, et cetera. That is what fascinated me, and I was particularly good at it. So that funneled the scope of companies that I was looking at. But their view was, look, go somewhere where you like the people, you have a chance to have an impact, and you trust that what they're doing is honest. And it's a classic. Would you want to ride with these people on an airplane somewhere, right? Yeah. As silly as that sort of sounds now, but that was their advice. And I probably went through 10 different companies, said no to 9, and there was one that was a startup in San Diego that was focused on essentially again traffic management of the internet. And their founder at the time, their CTO, he and I had a very, very good rapport off the bat, and that's where I went. We were successful at that run for the next couple of years as well. But that was sort of how it began in some of the decision criteria.
Got it. And then I saw, ultimately you ended up in some larger companies like IBM and Dell, and before you got to Axway. How did that transition go from like startup to some of these like large, institutions? And was there like almost like culture shock, company culture shock when you kind of like go from like that smaller environment to such a large one? Walk us through kind of like what that felt like and kind of like how you made that decision.
Yeah, 100%. So my first company, iPivot, was acquired by Intel. And so iPivot, like I didn't mention it, but iPivot was like an internet traffic management company, right? So essentially, if you're browsing eBay or Amazon, we were like a Cisco and we were trying to figure out how do we make the traffic, that, if it's taking an end user, 8 seconds to get, search results from Amazon.com or eBay, how do we take it from 7 seconds down to 4, down to 2, down to 1, and then, et cetera. And so that's what we were doing. Intel was wanting to make its move into the networking space. So to move from just doing, server and chips, PC chips and memory, to now moving into processors that would focus on essentially network traffic and the processing of network packets. And we were, I think, one of 8 companies that they acquired into the networking space. And they chose to make San Diego and our offices and our headquarters the home of their networking division. And so my CEO became the general manager of the networking division. My boss became the CTO, and then I became his head of what we called advanced development at the time. And to say that it was a culture shock is really an understatement. And a very good example, I think I have of that is, we were a company that focused on figuring out how to accelerate and improve internet traffic. When we got to Intel, they actually didn't allow outside internet access, right? So you actually could not go to eBay.com or go to Amazon.com. It was it was a walled garden, right? You were in the Intel, internet or intranet, and you really couldn't go outside of that. And I remember for the first couple of months of our time there, it was going through all the legal and discussions with IT about how we can't really do our job if we don't have access to the internet, right? We can't even test the products. We can't, do research in terms of like trying to gather data or gather traffic and then try to figure out where there are issues or where there may be bottlenecks if we don't have access to it. And so that right there was a real sort of, splash of cold water, even though when at the point at which we were acquired, we very much thought that with the backing of Intel, we could grow this division to be like the leading, network equipment provider, bigger than any of our competitors at the time. But the day that we walk in and we learn that there's no access to the internet, it was kind of like, oh, wow, this is like, it was like a huge, sort of, slamming on the brakes and recognizing that we're in a different place now. And the way in which they did product releases, they were more of a silicon company at the time. So they thought in 18-month increments. We were a software company that, thought about, things in agile and releasing on a very frequent basis, not on an 18-month cadence. And so, those things were just oil and water when we got to Intel.
Got it. And so, like how did you navigate through that? And then ultimately, was that the reason that you decided to move on from that situation?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much.
Okay.
We were able to kind of, punch a hole in the firewall and kind of get on the outside and continue to sort of, evolve and innovate and create product. Our frustration was still just sort of at the speed at which we were moving. Again, their release cycle was just very different than our release cycle, and the way they thought about development was just different than the way that we thought about development. And so fundamentally, there's at some point there's an impasse and there's an amount of frustration, and me and a handful of others broke off to go work on the next startup, and ultimately left Intel to go do that. And in hindsight, when I look back at once I got through the second startup, which was really 3+ years of an ungodly amount of hours per day and per week. Did I look back at it and say, I was a bit arrogant, in my thoughts on what we could be doing there. I was a bit arrogant in not giving it a bit more time or trying to have more influence on the situation. And, still believe I learned quite a bit, from the experience. But it took a little bit of putting it in the rearview mirror before I could fully appreciate that.
Yeah, fair enough. So talk us through a little bit about the second startup. I know you mentioned it before, in terms of like, raising 2 rounds and then ultimately, getting to a position where you didn't have market fit and having to make that difficult decision of what to do. But you just said that you had spent 3 years on the second startup, and what did that look like? You said it's you and a handful of other people that went to start this thing. I think out of curiosity, and a lot of our listeners would probably be curious, this is like, how do you at that point make a decision to like leave something obviously that you guys got acquired, consistency, stability, some semblance of routine, even though there's like that frustration, but then leaving to go start something brand new versus, let's say, leaving that job, finding another job in corporate, and then making that more like kind of like, I guess, like a seamless transition. So what was going through your mind to take that risk?
Yeah, again, I wish I was, that present to really have a sense for, how well thought out it was. That said, some patterns, right? So those of us that moved on to the next startup were all people that were, believed in small companies, believed in moving quickly, didn't care too much for, let's say, process. And we're always, looking for sort of new trends or where's the new next big idea, right? So all of us that were involved in it sort of had that sort of same DNA or that same mindset. And, in that process, right, we uncovered, many different ideas that we could be pursuing. One or two of them, it was very clear Intel did not want to pursue as part of our company. We gathered clearance to go pursue it ourselves if we could. And we essentially were able to, re-engage the investors from the first company to help us go start the second company. So, I mean, that's essentially, it was the people, we looked around at each other. We're like, we want to do this. There was an idea. There were investors. We had clearance to go do something else. And pretty quickly, the 4 of us, were in a garage in Boulder, Colorado for a few days, working through the way, the architecture, what the product was ultimately going to be, how we're going to bring it out, et cetera. And for the first, let's say, year or so of our time, we were a fully distributed team. We had 2 folks in Colorado and 2 of us in San Diego. And, my boss worked at home. I worked at home. The 2 folks in Colorado worked at home as well. And, that's just how it began. We grew over time, on the engineering side, and then eventually began in bringing folks that could help us, sort of market and position and message the product. But that's really where it began. It's not anything more, I don't know, kind of breakthrough in our thinking. It was just like, we all want to do these things. Mm-hmm. We still think there's time to take some big risks. Maybe we were a little bit drunk on our success from the first one and felt like it would be easy to do again, which obviously it proved not to be. But it was really more about the people. We thought we had a good idea and people were willing to back us. And so we did it.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I would say, it's not super uncommon of a situation, kind of like I've heard at least on this series of things where a few guests where they've talked about, they had success, sold their company, then went out, created a different iteration of that company. But then it's a 50-50 split kind of in terms of whether they're able to do it a second time or not. Right. So, yeah. Interesting. So, what would you say were the learnings the second go around that were different than that first time? Obviously making these difficult decisions after a 3-year period, but what would you say are some like the top 2-3 things that you took away from that experience that, you think about today and kind of like, oh, you make peace with that based off of what you learned?
The first one that comes to mind is that timing is everything. Mm-hmm. That sounds silly, but the products that we were working on then that ultimately were not considered a commercial success are now sort of ubiquitous, in the cloud and in enterprise environments, right? And that's true in the consumer world. You can look around at consumer products, whether it's the iPhone of today or the Newton of the past. I mean, all of these things. There's not a lot of like breakthrough brand new ideas It's more like, is the time right? Are the economics correct? Is the consumer ready to consume that thing at this point in time or not? And timing, in my opinion, is the hardest thing to get right. We're all pretty good at finding problems that can be big and meaty in size, but is now the right time to try to execute against that idea and trying to solve it, or is it better served in another 2, 3, 4, or 5 years? The second thing, and I've said it a few times, right, is that the people really matter, especially in that situation where we were all working 100-hour weeks. Mm-hmm. Even though we weren't at that time, face to face with each other, if we didn't like each other or have high degrees of respect for one another, I'm not sure it would have been in any way possible, right? Even though we had success the first time, this time around, it was more and more now on our shoulders to see it through. And if we weren't all on the same page, not to say that we were always on the same page, but at least we shared the same vision. We shared the same work ethic, and we shared the same desire to see this thing successful. I'm not sure that it would have been. The third one is I already mentioned it, right? But we still had the mindset that if we build it, it's going to be a success. And we very quickly learned that was not going to be as easy, both in terms of the timing of the market. So this is like 2001, 2002. While we were fortunate to raise funding, everybody had kind of sewn up their wallets and their purses, and were not necessarily willing to pay money for these new products. And the timing didn't work out there, but also we were still of the mindset of, don't look at this thing. It's the greatest thing ever. Why wouldn't you buy it? Versus, the other way, which is, hey, here's the real problem. Here's what the problem cost you. This is why you're, either less profitable or less competitive, and let's show you how we can help fix that. Versus, we built the great thing. Please just use it, pay us for it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of hits home back to kind of when we asked who your favorite entrepreneur is, which is Jeff Bezos, and then talking about that flywheel that starts with delighting the customer. And I think that kind of seems like it's a theme that resonates from that experience, like to the present, that you've strongly taken away. Let's fast forward to today. How large is the team that you manage today over at Axway? And then how do you, obviously it's a different skill set, I think, like managing people at that level than it is, more on the technical side. So, how has that shifted for you, kind of like being now this individual that is leading a team, but also like, being the go-to for certain answers, and in a certain sense, the buck stops with you on a lot of these like technical decisions. So like how does that weigh on you? How is that experience a little bit different than before, than some of your, I guess, like earlier career jobs and stuff? Yeah.
So the way I start this was saying, like, my time at Axway, I've been with the company now for about 5.5 years, and my role has evolved really in 3 phases, right? The first phase, I was brought in on the product side to try to figure out how do we move from what at the time were 40 or more sort of unique and distinct products to that of a platform. And all of that was going to involve not just sort of the technology and the architecture and the experience, but it was also going to involve the evolution to subscription, right? And to as a service, and to cloud delivery techniques and cloud delivery models, et cetera, et cetera. And at the time when I joined, I was essentially a team of 2, maybe 3 at the time. The team has obviously grown rather dramatically since that point. But I was brought in originally to kind of figure out how do we move from what are all these sort of siloed products to a platform that provides its own sort of flywheel based around sort of consumption and increasing value and whatnot. Then I moved into sort of the second chapter, which was more of sort of complete product, which was to look across not just sort of the to-be state of the platform, but more about how do we bring the as-is forward into the platform. And then the role that I sit in now, which is Chief Technology and Innovation Officer, where now I'm looking more at Horizon 2 and Horizon 3 for us. So think of that as, 18 months and beyond in terms of where we're going, with the products, where we're going with the platform, where we're going, with our business model, what is our sort of long-term competitive differentiator, what is our North Star, what is our flywheel, et cetera. And so the functions that I am interacting with are certainly product, R&D, design and architecture, but also one thing I guess I'll bring up to the audience, because most folks would think like, oh, why would a CTO be doing that? Is, I spend a lot of time externally facing. So, having chats like this with yourself, but certainly also with our customers, with our partners, with the analyst community that covers, the markets that we sit in. And a lot of it is around sort of thought leadership on what we see happening in the market and what we see happening with the community and with our customers, but also, trying as best we can to, influence and to bring forward our point of view vis-a-vis, our customers, vis-a-vis our competition, et cetera. So there you go.
Got it. Great answer. Cool. As we kind of like wind things down here, I just have kind of one more question, which is, where do you see yourself in like the next 5 years? Do you feel like you're gonna, you're kind of like at the top of like the technical side of things, for Axway, but do you see yourself evolving in some capacity in this role at this company? Do you foresee, at some point in your life, like going out, experimenting and trying to build something again? Just curious as to like what some of your personal motivators now are as it relates to your professional career.
Yeah. So, I love what I'm doing, and it kind of ties back to some of the criteria around like, where do you go? What do you do? Why do you do it? Et cetera. It's, I think, Axway's ceiling, we're still a long way away from hitting our ceiling. I think the folks that are around me, the team I get to work with, the executives, my peers, the broader Axway community is fantastic. The way in which we go about doing our business and how we do it, and I think the grandness of the vision that we have in the market is compelling and keeps me energized. So I'm really happy doing what I'm doing and are looking forward to the next 5 years. If you were to ask, well, give me a little bit more detail about sort of what are you looking to kind of grow, in your role. I think at this point in time, I think all businesses are becoming, more analytical, bringing more data to the table, trying to understand more and more about their customers. And I think, for me, whether it's, me taking courses in some of those topics, in user research, in analytics, et cetera, that's where I expect to continue to try to grow my skills or my capabilities. So it's not about, let's say technology per se, in terms of, new whiz bang things that may be coming up. That stuff tends to just find me, right? It's not like I have to kind of go out and do research and look for it. Because of the role I sit in, because of, I've spent 20 plus years, building up a pipeline of information that is fed to me through various digital channels. The technology pieces of it, I continue to grow in. But there's all the stuff around sort of how do I get better about, again, understanding the customer, both in terms of my own primary research of going out and speaking to them, but also sort of how do we gather more information, gather more insights, and then apply those insights back into what we're doing, is I think a skill set that I still have, more to be done and more work to do.
Awesome. Great answers, by the way. I love kind of the almost like holistic view that you have on, on business, on product. I think like really taking that customer feedback loop, and at the stage of where you guys are now, be able to like iterate on the product or services that you guys offer based off of that to incrementally make their lives more optimal or make their lives, more efficient, as opposed to, like building, like the builder mentality that you were talking about before, which is like, look what we can do, look at what's so great about this, that it's more like kind of like ego driven, I think, more than anything else. And as opposed to actually like listening and having that humility to take that and learn from it. Super insightful, and thanks for taking the time again. Your journey is pretty interesting, and I think a lot of listeners could probably relate to it. We get a lot of individuals that have done startups before and then have transitioned into more corporate, and then vice versa. And so I think like you having bounced around in a few of those different arenas, it's been hopefully something for them to grasp onto and find a similar story in their journey.
Awesome. I appreciate you having me on the podcast, Chris.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much.
All right, take care.